Jake was just finishing up his Saturday morning coffee when there was a sharp knock on his front door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Curious, he set down his cup and walked over. Standing there was a middle-aged woman wearing a crisp blazer and a name tag that read Karen. Her expression was serious, almost stern. Jake recognized her name instantly. Karen was the president of the nearby neighborhood association, the group of homes across the street with their perfectly trimmed lawns and strict rules. Karen held out an envelope. "This is for you," she said. "It's about your property." Jake took the envelope with a raised eyebrow, wondering what kind of issue could be so urgent. He thanked her politely and closed the door. Sitting back down, he tore open the envelope. Inside was a formal letter filled with phrases about rules and regulations. The letter said that Jake was violating guidelines set by Karen's neighborhood association and that he needed to take immediate action to fix it. Jake frowned and read the letter twice. The problem was, he didn't even live in that neighborhood. His small house was just outside the boundary lines of Karen's association. He had lived there for years without any complaints. He was careful about his yard, respectful to neighbors, and had never heard a word about breaking any rules. He glanced out the window at his little garden, where his roses were blooming and the lawn looked just fine. Nothing about his place looked out of place or against any kind of neighborhood standard. He called his best friend Sam to vent. "You won't believe this," Jake said. "Karen from that HOA thing just sent me a letter saying I'm breaking their rules. But I don't even live there. How does that make sense?" Sam chuckled on the other end. "Maybe she thinks she's the queen of everything around here. Sounds like trouble." Jake sighed. "I don't want trouble. I just want to live in peace." Over the next few hours, Jake looked through old papers and maps he had saved from when he bought the house. He pulled up his town's website and searched for official boundaries. All signs pointed to the same thing. His home was not inside the neighborhood Karen managed. Still, the letter was clear and demanded action. Jake felt the weight of it, as if someone was trying to make him something he was not, or take away something he had earned with years of care. He started thinking about what this could mean if he ignored it. Would Karen keep sending letters? Could this escalate? He wasn't sure how far she was willing to go, but he knew he didn't want to get pulled into something complicated. That night, Jake lay awake wondering why Karen was doing this. Had there been a mistake? Or was it something else? A personal grudge, perhaps? He didn't know, but the whole thing felt wrong. The next morning, Jake decided to visit the town hall. He wanted to see if anyone else could explain this strange situation. At the records desk, a friendly clerk pulled out official maps and zoning information. She showed Jake the exact boundaries of the neighborhood associations. "See here," she said, pointing at the map. "Your house is just outside this red line. This is Karen's neighborhood, but you are definitely not inside it." Jake nodded, feeling a little relief but still puzzled about the letter he had received. On the way home, he thought about what to do next. He wasn't a confrontational person, but he also wasn't going to ignore something that could affect his home. If Karen really believed she had the right to tell him what to do on his own property, that was a problem. He opened his laptop and started researching. He typed in phrases like neighborhood association boundaries and property rights. Slowly, he began to understand how these groups operated and what powers they had. It turned out that neighborhood associations could only enforce rules within their own boundaries. If someone lived outside those limits, the association had no say. Jake felt a bit more confident now, but knew he needed advice from someone who understood these things better. He made a list of local attorneys specializing in real estate and community issues. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Karen. Her tone was polite but firm. She wanted to talk about the letter. Jake took a deep breath and answered. The conversation was tense but brief. Karen insisted that Jake was causing problems and needed to fix them immediately. Jake calmly explained that he did not live in her neighborhood and that he had proof to show it. Karen didn't seem convinced, but ended the call quickly. Jake hung up and thought to himself that this was only the beginning of something bigger than he had expected. But he was ready to stand his ground and clear things up once and for all. The next morning, Jake woke up feeling a mix of frustration and determination. He had a clear goal now, to prove that his home wasn't part of Karen's neighborhood. He pulled out a big folding map he had tucked away in a drawer, the one he used when he first bought the house. It was old, but the boundaries of the neighborhoods hadn't changed much over the years. Jake spread the map across his kitchen table and carefully traced the lines with his finger. Sure enough, the thick red line marking Karen's neighborhood stopped just before his street. His house was clearly on the other side. Still, old maps could be out of date. To be sure, Jake grabbed his laptop and started digging through the town's official website. He found a section for property records and zoning maps. There it was, a digital map showing all the neighborhood boundaries and property lines in high detail. He zoomed in on his address. The colored lines on the screen matched exactly what he saw on the old paper map. His house sat just outside Karen's neighborhood. A small smile crept onto Jake's face. The facts were on his side. But why had Karen sent that letter then? Why make such a fuss over something that was so clearly wrong? Jake decided to call the town's planning office for more help. After a brief wait, a friendly woman named Linda picked up the phone. He explained his situation and asked if she could confirm the neighborhood boundaries for his address. Absolutely, Linda said cheerfully. Let me check your property on the system. Jake waited as she clicked through her computer. After a moment, she spoke again. Your house is definitely outside the HOA boundaries that Karen is involved with. I don't see any reason why she would have the right to send you that letter. Jake thanked her, feeling even more confident that the letter was baseless. But something still didn't sit right. What if Karen was trying to stretch her influence beyond her neighborhood? Or maybe there was some confusion on her side? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Jake made a trip to the county recorder's office. There, he requested official property and boundary documents for his home. The clerk handed him copies of legal descriptions, boundary surveys, and the HOA's declaration documents. Back at home, Jake spread the paperwork on his dining table. The legal descriptions used lines, numbers, and coordinates, complicated stuff at first glance. But as he compared the HOA's declaration with his property's legal survey, the truth was crystal clear. His house was not included in Karen's HOA. Jake felt a mix of relief and pride. He had done his homework. If this ever went further, he would be ready. As the day wore on, Jake's phone buzzed with a message from his friend Sam. This sounds crazy. Let me know if you want me to come over and help. Jake smiled and replied, Thanks, man. I might take you up on that. That evening, Jake sat down to organize all the evidence he had gathered. He scanned the maps, legal papers, and the letter from Karen. He even made notes explaining everything clearly. This was no longer just a confusing letter. It was a challenge. And Jake was ready to respond. But even with all the facts, Jake still wondered what motivated Karen to act this way. Was it a personal grudge or just a misunderstanding? He hoped he wouldn't have to find out the hard way. Before bed, Jake thought about what his next step would be. Ignoring the letter wasn't an option. If Karen's association tried to claim authority over his property, he wanted to be prepared. He decided to reach out to a lawyer the next day, someone who understood these neighborhood associations, and could help him handle the situation calmly and confidently. Jake also started writing down questions to ask the lawyer. What rights did he have? How far could an HOA president push? Could he stop Karen before things got messy? As he turned off the light, Jake felt a renewed sense of hope. He wasn't going to let a mistaken claim threaten his home or peace of mind. The truth was on his side, and he would make sure everyone knew it. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Jake sat at his kitchen table, papers spread out in front of him. The letter from Karen, the maps, the official documents, All of it told the same story. Yet he knew facts alone might not be enough. He needed someone who understood the finer points of property rules and neighborhood associations to help him navigate this unexpected mess. After a quick search, Jake found a local attorney who specialized in real estate and property matters. He picked up the phone and dialed the number listed. The voice on the other end was warm and professional. "Hello, this is Mark. How can I help you today?" Jake took a deep breath and explained the situation, describing Karen's letter and his evidence showing his house was outside the neighborhood association's boundaries. Mark listened patiently without interrupting. When Jake finished, Mark said, "This sounds straightforward. If your property is outside the association's boundaries, then they don't have authority over you. But sometimes these situations can get complicated if someone insists on pushing the issue. It's good you reached out early." Jake felt a little relief wash over him. "What should I do next?" Mark suggested, gathering all the documents Jake had collected, including the letter from Karen, the official maps, and the county records. "Bring everything to my office. I'll review it and draft a clear response to make sure Karen and her association understand your rights." Jake agreed to meet with Mark later that day. After hanging up, he sent a quick message to his friend Sam. "Got a lawyer. Meeting this afternoon." Sam replied, "Smart move. Keep me posted." At Mark's office, Jake sat in a modest conference room. Mark spread out the maps and documents, reviewing each carefully. "This letter from Karen," Mark said, "makes it sound urgent, but it's important to stay calm. You have the facts on your side, and that will carry a lot of weight." Mark explained how neighborhood associations generally operate. They have authority only within their designated boundaries, and homeowners outside those lines are not subject to their rules or fees. He also mentioned that some people in leadership positions might overstep their authority, either by mistake or by pushing too hard. Mark assured Jake that a well-worded response could quickly end the confusion and prevent any unnecessary legal battles. Together, they drafted a letter. It began by politely stating Jake's address and confirming that his property lay outside the association's jurisdiction. It cited the official maps and county records as evidence. The letter respectfully requested that the association cease any claims or demands regarding Jake's property. Jake felt good about the letter. It was clear, professional, and firm without being confrontational. Mark advised Jake to send the letter by certified mail, so there would be proof that Karen and the association received it. He also suggested keeping a copy for Jake's records. After the meeting, Jake walked out feeling a little lighter. He now had a plan and a legal expert on his side. Back at home, Jake prepared to mail the letter. Before doing so, he double-checked everything, making sure all the facts were clear and easy to understand. That evening, Jake sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the trees. His mind wandered back to Karen and her sudden letter. Why had she acted so quickly? Had she truly believed Jake was breaking rules? Or was there another reason behind? Her actions? He decided that he wouldn't waste energy trying to figure out Karen's motives. Instead, he would focus on what he could control, protecting his home and making sure the truth was known. Jake's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a neighbor across the street. "Heard about the letter. If you need anything, I'm here." Jake smiled, feeling grateful for the support. As the night settled in, Jake felt ready. He knew this wasn't just about a letter or a neighborhood association. It was about standing up for himself and his home. With Mark's help, Jake was confident the issue would soon be resolved. All that was left was to wait for the letter to reach Karen and see what happened next. The morning of the court hearing arrived quickly. Jake woke up feeling a mixture of nerves and calm determination. He had prepared everything carefully and, with his lawyer Mark by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. When they arrived at the courthouse, the building looked imposing, with tall pillars and busy hallways filled with people. Jake wasn't used to places like this, but Mark guided him confidently through security and toward the right courtroom. Inside, the room was quiet and serious. Karen was already there, seated with a few others from her neighborhood association. She glanced at Jake with a look that seemed a mix of surprise and stubbornness. The judge entered and took a seat at the bench. The courtroom settled down as the hearing began. Karen's lawyer spoke first, presenting her case. He claimed that Jake had violated rules and insisted that the association had authority over his property. But his argument was broad and mostly based on assumptions, not facts. Then it was Mark's turn. He calmly laid out the evidence: official maps, property records, and county documents. Step by step, Mark explained that Jake's home was clearly outside the neighborhood association's boundaries. He pointed out the exact lines on the maps and read from the county's official descriptions. Jake watched as the judge examined the papers carefully. The judge asked a few questions, making sure the facts were clear. Jake felt his heart rate slow as the truth became obvious to everyone in the room. Mark then told the judge that Jake had received a letter from Karen's association demanding action on a property that wasn't theirs to control. He asked the court to recognize Jake's rights and dismiss the association's claim. Karen's lawyer tried to argue further, but the evidence was solid. The judge shook his head gently and said, "Based on the documentation presented, it is clear that the property in question lies outside the jurisdiction of the neighborhood association. Therefore, their claims do not apply." The judge's words echoed in the room. It all happened so fast. What Jake had feared might drag on for weeks was decided in minutes. Karen looked disappointed but said nothing. The judge continued, "I dismiss the claims brought against Mr. Jake, and no further action shall be taken." The courtroom began to clear as people gathered their things. Jake felt a huge wave of relief wash over him. The burden of uncertainty and worry lifted. Outside the courthouse, Mark clapped Jake on the back. "You handled that well. The truth is powerful when you have the right proof." Jake nodded, feeling grateful for Mark's support. "I just want to get back to normal." On the way home, Jake thought about how quickly things had turned around. Just days ago, he had no idea why he had received that letter. Now the issue was settled. Still, Jake knew this wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about setting things straight for himself and anyone else who might face similar confusion. He decided to share the news with some neighbors who had been watching the situation unfold. People were relieved to hear the quick resolution. That evening, Jake sat on his porch and looked out at his yard. The roses were still blooming, and the lawn was as neat as ever. Nothing had changed here except for the weight lifted from his shoulders. He smiled quietly to himself. Sometimes standing up for what is right means stepping into unfamiliar territory. But with the truth on your side, things can turn around faster than you expect. Jake was ready to move forward, knowing he had protected his home and peace of mind. Jake barely had time to process what had happened in the courtroom before it started to sink in. The judge's decision had come so fast it almost felt unreal. 3 minutes after Mark finished presenting the evidence, it was over. No drawn-out arguments, no back and forth, just a clear decision based on simple facts. Back outside in the fresh air, Jake stood for a moment on the courthouse steps, breathing it all in. A few people from the courtroom passed by without saying a word. Karen was nowhere in sight. She had slipped out quietly after the hearing, her once confident presence now gone. Mark turned to Jake and gave him a small nod. That's what happens when you come in prepared. You respected the process. You brought facts, not opinions. That's all it takes sometimes. Jake smiled, grateful not just for the win, but for how simple it had been in the end. No drama, no shouting. Just the truth, backed by documents that spoke for themselves. They shook hands, and Mark promised to send a final copy of the court's dismissal for Jake's records. "This probably won't come up again," Mark said. "But if it does, you've already set the record straight." On the drive home, Jake couldn't help but think about how much stress had come from one unexpected letter. Just one piece of paper, sent by someone who either didn't check the facts or didn't care about them. had thrown his whole week off course. Still, he wasn't bitter. He didn't want to be the kind of person who let things like this change who he was. He had handled it calmly, he had gotten help, and now it was done. Back at his house, Jake pulled into the driveway and looked at his front yard. Everything was as peaceful as ever. The little white gate, the green lawn, the trimmed roses, it was all exactly how he liked it. He got out of the car and stretched. His neighbor, Mrs. Evans, waved at him from her porch across the street. "Heard you went to court today," she said with a smile. "Everything okay?" Jake walked over and gave her the short version. "It's all settled. Judge said the HOA had no authority over my property. Case dismissed." Mrs. Evans nodded. "Good. That woman's been trying to stretch those rules for years. You did the right thing." Jake thanked her and walked back to his porch. He sat down in his usual spot with a cold glass of water and just listened to the sounds around him, the breeze, a few birds, a distant lawnmower, all the things he loved about living here. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jake thought about how fast it had all unfolded in court. It wasn't just the win that stuck with him, it was how confidently the truth had stood on its own. No shouting match, no complicated argument, just the quiet power of being right, backed up by clear proof. He knew there was still a chance Karen might try something again. She didn't strike him as the type to walk away easily. But now, he had the legal records, the boundaries confirmed, and the support of neighbors who had seen how he handled everything. For now, though, it was over. And that was enough. As the stars began to peek out above the trees, Jake leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. He had stood up for himself, stayed calm, and let the truth do the talking. And in the end, that had been more than enough. Tomorrow, he'd get back to his normal routine. But tonight, he was going to sit right there and enjoy the quiet comfort of knowing his home was truly his. The days following the court decision were quiet, almost too quiet. Jake noticed the difference immediately. No more strange letters, no phone calls, no unexpected knocks at the door. It was like the storm had passed, and now everything had returned to normal. But it wasn't just silence that filled the neighborhood. Something else had shifted. Neighbors who usually kept to themselves now stopped to wave or say a few kind words when Jake passed by. A couple of them even came by to ask how everything turned out. Jake didn't go into too much detail. He just smiled and said the truth came out and things were settled. That was enough for most people. They nodded, satisfied, and seemed happy to hear that someone had stood up and taken care of something that didn't sit right. He had always kept a low profile. He mowed his lawn, kept his garden tidy, and helped out when someone needed a hand. But now, it felt like people were seeing him differently. Not just as the quiet guy who lived outside the HOA, but as someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for himself with calm and clarity. Across the street, Karen's house remained quiet. Her yard, which was usually the most manicured on the block, had gone a little untended. The hedges looked slightly overgrown, and the seasonal flowers in her front planters had started to droop. It wasn't anything drastic, just enough to make Jake wonder if maybe she had taken a step back for a while. He didn't see her much anymore. No walks around the block, no clipboard check-ins with her neighborhood group, no more flyers stuck to mailboxes about new rules or upcoming meetings. It was like she had disappeared into her house. Jake didn't wish her any harm. In fact, part of him hoped the experience had just given her a chance to reflect. Maybe she realized that boundaries exist for a reason, and not every problem needed to be handled with a warning letter or a threat. One afternoon, as Jake trimmed the hedges along his driveway, a couple walking their dog stopped at the edge of his yard. "You're Jake, right?" the man asked with a grin. "We heard about the hearing. Good on you. Karen's been trying to rope more houses into the association for years." Jake laughed lightly and wiped his hands on his jeans. I just wanted to be left alone, honestly. Well, the woman added, you handled it better than most people would have. We were rooting for you. They chatted for a few minutes, then continued their walk. Jake stood there for a moment, surprised by the sudden support from people he hadn't even met before. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, even in a small way, but it felt good to know that doing things the right way, quietly, patiently, without drama, still earned respect. That night, Jake sat out on the porch again, a light breeze moving through the trees. His dog, Bailey, lay at his feet, snoring, softly. It felt peaceful again, but this time it was a deeper peace, like something had been cleared out, not just around his home, but within it too. The tension that had settled in during those first few days after the letter had faded, and now all that was left was a quiet confidence. He didn't know if Karen would ever apologize or try to speak with him. Maybe she wouldn't. And maybe that was fine. Sometimes, Jake thought, it's not about getting the last word or winning a fight. It's about knowing you did the right thing and letting that speak for itself. He reached down and scratched Bailey, behind the ears. The dog wagged his tail but didn't wake. Jake leaned back in his chair and let the calm settle in. For the first time in a while, he felt like everything was exactly where it should be. A week after the court decision, life had finally found its rhythm again. Jake was back to his quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. No more digging through property records, no more meetings with lawyers, and no more wondering what Karen might do next. It felt like the chapter had closed, but Jake knew better than to assume everything was behind him. One evening, while watering his rose bushes, he noticed Karen walking her small white dog down the sidewalk across the street. It was the first time he had seen her since the hearing. She didn't look his way, but he could tell by her posture that she was carrying more weight than usual. Not physically, but in the way her steps seemed slower, her gaze lower. He thought about waving. He even lifted his hand halfway, then stopped. He wasn't sure if she wanted to see him, and truthfully, he didn't need a confrontation. Things were quiet now, and he wanted to keep it that way. The next day, Jake received an envelope in his mailbox, no postage, just tucked in by hand. Inside was a short, typed note from Karen. Mr. Jake, while we may not agree on everything, I acknowledge the decision made by the court and will not pursue this matter further. K. Bennett there. Was no apology, no warmth. But there was an end to it. And for Jake, that was enough. He showed the letter to Mark, his lawyer, just to be safe. Mark read it and nodded. That's as close to a formal retreat as you're going to get. She's walking away. Jake folded the letter and placed it with the rest of the documents he'd kept in a small file. He didn't plan to look at them again, but he wasn't going to throw them away either, just in case. Over the next few days, Jake made a quiet decision. Instead of keeping all this to himself, he was going to share what he'd learned, not to stir trouble, but to help others. Avoid it, he started small. He wrote a short, friendly guide titled Know Your Boundaries, which explained how to find out whether your property was part of a neighborhood group or not. He included tips about checking records, reading maps, and how to stay calm if confusion ever came up. He printed a few copies and left them in the little free library box at the end of his street. He posted the PDF version in a local online forum where residents shared lawn tips, yard sale updates, and sometimes gentle complaints about noisy dogs. The response was surprisingly positive. People appreciated the information. Some even messaged him, asking for help reading their property maps. Jake found himself answering questions he never expected to hear, like, what's the difference between a boundary line and a setback? It felt good. Not because he wanted attention, but because he realized how many people didn't know their rights or didn't know how to handle situations like his without it becoming a fight. He made it clear to everyone that his goal wasn't to stir up division. He wasn't against neighborhood groups. He just believed in fairness and that people deserved to know where they stood. That attitude kept things peaceful. Even Karen, who continued her quiet walks and kept to herself, didn't push back against what Jake was doing. Maybe she had realized it too. How easy it was to cross lines without meaning to. As summer stretched on, Jake found a new kind of peace. Not just the calm that comes after a storm, but the kind that comes from knowing he didn't let frustration or anger take over. He had stayed steady, respected the process, and came out stronger on the other side. And maybe, just maybe, the whole neighborhood had learned something from it too. The sun rose slowly on a warm Saturday morning, casting long golden shadows across Jake's front yard. The quiet hum of summer surrounded him, birds chirping from the trees, a distant lawnmower starting up, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. It had been several weeks since the court hearing, and life had gently settled into place. The tension was gone, and in its place was a new kind of stillness, earned not by confrontation, but by patience and truth. Jake leaned against the porch railing with his coffee in hand, watching Bailey stretch out lazily by the front steps. His little house hadn't changed, but something in the way he felt about it had. It wasn't just a place where he lived anymore. It was something he had protected. He'd been thinking about that a lot lately. Not the drama or the courtroom or the letter, but the deeper idea behind it all, knowing where your boundaries are and standing by them without anger or fear. Across the street, a few neighbors were setting up for a weekend garage sale. Someone waved at Jake, and he waved back. People had warmed up to him in subtle ways since everything happened. There were more greetings, more small chats, more nods of quiet respect. He didn't need praise. That was never what this was about. But it felt good to know that he had done something right, not just for himself, but in a way that helped others feel a little more secure in their own homes too. Jake had even gotten a couple of thank you notes from neighbors he hadn't met before. One family said they had always felt unsure about their property lines, but were afraid to ask. After reading Jake's simple guide, they looked up their records and found clarity without any drama. That, Jake thought, was worth more than any courtroom win. Karen, for her part, had remained distant. She no longer sent out long emails or hosted neighborhood meetings every month. The tone of the HOA had softened. It wasn't gone, but it was quieter, more focused on helping than controlling. One day, Jake saw her in the local hardware store. She passed him in the aisle, paused for a second, and gave a short nod. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. And honestly, that was all he needed. Sometimes peace doesn't come with an apology. It just arrives when people let go. Back on his porch, Jake took another sip of coffee and watched a butterfly land gently on the edge of his rose bush. The garden was doing well this year. Things were growing again, quietly, without force, just the way they should. Bailey wagged his tail in his sleep, chasing something in a dream, and Jake smiled. He thought back to that first letter and how strange it had felt to be told he was doing something wrong in a place where he had always felt at home. But he realized now that it hadn't just been about that letter or that hearing. It had been about something bigger. About knowing who you are, knowing where you stand, and being willing to protect that in a calm and respectful way. The truth had been on his side, but it was the way he carried himself that made all the difference. He hadn't gotten angry. He hadn't fought back with harsh words or pointed fingers. He had simply stood his ground with grace. That, he believed, was the reason it had all worked out. As the sun rose higher and the street began to fill with quiet weekend life, Jake leaned back in his chair and let the morning wash over him. Whatever came next, he was ready for it. Because now, more than ever, he knew this was his home, and no one could take that away from him.